You may struggle with or altogether hate being alone or single, but what if it's actually what you need? I'm going to utilize Freudian psychology and his structure of psychoanalytic theory, specifically the ego state, to explore this because I think that this is a very fascinating thing. Why? Well, when you don't get the time to yourself that you need, whether earlier on in life or some point in, young adulthood or, later on in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, whenever it is, right? You might not actually get to fully know yourself. And one of the most important things about any individual's development is the ego state, is the development of the ego state, is self awareness, right? Not everybody gets to have self awareness, not because they're not capable of it, it's because they don't give it to themselves, right? A lot of people out there absolutely hate being alone. They absolutely hate being single, right? Maybe they attach certain meaning to it, which makes them feel worthless, right? Nobody wants to feel worthless, right? It's not a fun feeling, especially for those people that have learned to tie their sense of self worth to the external and have learned a belief that they are only worthy if they have this, that, and the other in their life. Usually a thing, a person, a circumstance, an event, whatever it is, right? But the fascinating thing is to look at how much a person actually doesn't know themselves because they've just been surrounded by people their entire life, right? They've been surrounded by relationships, both platonic and romantic, right? This might not just be a matter of, um, romantic partners. Don't get me wrong, we're social creatures. We are, absolutely, right? Relationships are absolutely beneficial for us, and I would argue even necessary, right? But so is alone time. So is time to yourself. Where do you think self care comes from, right? Where do you think deep self love comes from, right? The capacity for a person to actually know themselves requires time by yourself, right? If all you do is spend time around other people, you're very much, I'm going to use the word enmeshed here because I think it's highly and deeply applicable. If all you do is spend your time around other people, the likelihood that you're just enmeshed with them and you don't have any sense of independence when it comes to socializing with people, right? Because, like, let's look at it, right? Whenever it comes to relationships and people, right? A very serious, I mean, that's interdependence, right? Having relationships is operating interdependently. That means inter, right? Between you and other, between self and other, between I, thou, right? What is it that you're doing when you are operating interdependently, right? There's the inter with you and other dependently. You are dependent on the other person in some way, shape, or form, right? Are you agreeing with absolutely everything that they're saying because you learned to do that as a survival mechanism so that they wouldn't leave you? Or are you actually presenting your own authentic individual self that is individuated, that is differentiated, that does have healthy boundaries, that does not fear that you having your own separate opinion, separate from theirs, away from theirs, is going to lead to them leaving you? Right? Some people actually just agree with people because they're afraid that if they don't agree with them, that that person is going to leave them. That's not authentic. That's not you presenting your authentic self. That's you presenting a survival mechanism that you learned in childhood in order to not be left by people, right? The fascinating thing about dynamics of enmeshment and codependency, where you continue to utilize these survival based defense mechanisms of not being your authentic self, they don't lead to healthier relationships. Actually, tension in relationships is not bad, right? If somebody presents something and you don't like it, you don't have to agree with it, right? And the fascinating thing too is that you will create even more interesting energy dynamics in relationships when you don't agree with people. Not because you want to disagree with people because you're trying to create a different dynamic, but simply because your opinions differ from them, which they are totally allowed to. Right? You don't have to agree with somebody just because you're terrified that they're going to leave you. You don't. In fact, if you utilize that tactic, the likelihood that they actually will leave you is much higher. Because at some point down the line, they're likely going to find out, discover that you're actually not being authentic. And that's not cool. It's not just that it's not cool, it's not healthy, right? I have had relationships throughout my life where earlier on I would agree. Again, that shows the dynamic of survival, the dynamic of codependency, of enmeshment. It's like, I will agree with absolutely anything and everything you say, just please don't leave me. I just don't want to be alone, right? I'm not going to get into the logistics or the details as to why I was like that or what led me to be like that, but it's not attractive. Tension in relationships is actually one of the most interesting slash attractive dynamics that people can create, right? Not only tension, don't get me wrong, you don't want to start attacking somebody, right? That's the important part of that. You do not want to start attacking somebody because that's just not healthy. But any relationship can get more and more interesting depending on how actually different people are, right? Imagine you're connecting with somebody and you have the ability, or I should say the opportunity. The ability is already there. The opportunity to learn something new or to expand your awareness, to expand your knowledge on something, right? Bouncing ideas off of somebody that is presenting information to you that is different from what you've previously. I'm not talking misinformation. I'm just talking about new data, right? No, no, no. Not misinformation. I'm talking about new data, right? But let's get back to the whole matter of being alone slash being single, the thing that many people out there are terrified of. I understand. I've been there, right? It's beneficial for the individual because looking specifically in Freudian psychology at psychoanalytic theory and the ego state, I'm not going to focus on the id or the superego, just simply the ego state, which does the best that it can to create the balance, right? Compromise between the superego and the ego. Superego and the id, right? Um, a lot of people actually don't have a well-developed ego state because they've never taken the time to be by themselves, right? Let's look at it this for instance, right? The ego state is something that starts to develop earlier on in life, right? The id is the first thing. I'm not going crazy into psychoanalytic theory, but the id is the first thing, and then the superego comes after a while. But the ego state, it starts to develop in not I'm not sure I remember the exact ages, but it's in like toddlerhood slash childhood. I want to say somewhere between like 3 and 5 years old, something like that. Anyway, it develops very early on. Individuals that did not have healthy childhoods did not get a boundary setting, a boundaried setting. There we go. They did not get a boundaried setting for their ego state to develop in a healthy way. They did not get individuation. They did not get differentiation. They're much more likely to end up in dynamics of enmeshment and codependency as a result of that. This is why I talk about why it's so important to spend time by yourself, to be alone, to be single. Imagine that you don't take the time to be alone and to be single, and all of a sudden you actually find yourself being attracted to relationships that do not benefit you, that are not healthy for you because you didn't take the time to be alone and be single. This is a very real thing for so many people. Like, this thing actually happens. People don't realize it, but they're putting themselves in relationships based on dynamics of like codependency and enmeshment because they never took the time to be alone. They're just terrified of being alone. Imagine people get into relationships solely to avoid the fearful feelings that come with being alone and being single for them specifically. Not that there's anything inherently like that comes with being alone or being single. It's just that they're trying to avoid feelings of being alone, being single. But the most important thing that they can do for themselves is to actually be alone and be single, because once they do, it might lead them to understand that they've just been participating in dynamics of codependency and enmeshment, which are not healthy at all, right? If you are in dynamics of codependency and enmeshment, you lack so much self, so much healthy self, so much knowledge of self, right? The only reason that a person would be in a dynamic of codependency and enmeshment is because they lack healthy self development, healthy ego state development, right? If you were actually aware of what it was that you were doing as somebody who's codependent and in dynamics of enmeshment, right? It's like Neo waking up from the Matrix, right? You're waking up and you're like, right, and the thing's coming out of your fucking mouth, and you're like, what have I been doing all of this time? Oh my god, my relationships have been a fucking boundaryless disaster, right? And then you discover like what you need is to actually be alone, like being alone, being single, right? There's this like pressure, especially in unhealthier both relationships and childhood upbringings. There's this pressure to be somebody rather than to allow your fucking ego state to develop in a healthy way. Oh, you need to be somebody. You need to be like the tradition that we've passed down for fucking generations and generations and generations. There's so much pressure to be somebody that you're being distracted. There's so much pressure to be a fucking man. There's so much pressure to be a fucking woman, right? That you're distracted by these ideas and these concepts, and you're so distracted from the natural fucking development of you, right? And if you don't actually spend time by yourself and you don't actually spend time being alone, you may never actually meet that. And God, that is terrifying. Right? I'm almost speechless because it's like so many people are terrified of being alone. They're terrified of being by themselves when it's actually probably, I don't mean to sound extreme, but like the single most fucking important thing that they can do. What does it feel like when you're by yourself? What does it feel like when you're alone? What does it feel like when you don't have a romantic love interest in your life? What does this sound like? And that's the thing. This is so challenging for a lot of people to approach. No, let's avoid it. Let's avoid it with relationships. Let's avoid it by relationship hopping. Let's avoid it by not actually processing what the fuck just happened in that train wreck of a fucking relationship that I just got out of. Let's avoid it with entertainment. Let's avoid it with this, that, and the other. Let's drown it the fuck out with all of this noise because I can't be alone. I can't be in this silence. This is starting to sound like Car Radio by 21 Pilots. Fucking love 21 Pilots and that song. I think that was the first song that I ever heard by 21 Pilots. But like truly, like so many people are terrified of being alone, even though it's essentially one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that they can be doing for themselves. Why? Well, because if you don't do it for yourself, there's a very good chance that you might just find yourself a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I know it's a drastic jump, but anyway, in the same fucking position that you were 10 years ago. And God, that is fucking scary. To go 10 years without any growth at all whatsoever, God, that's scary. Right? But like, you might fear being alone or being single, right? But you might not even realize that what you might regret the most 10 years down the line is having realized that you didn't do a single fucking ounce of growth, right? And let me just make this last comparison real quick. Um, Individuals that did not get healthy childhoods, that they did not get healthy boundaries, that did not get individuation, differentiation, they know themselves way fucking less than the people that did, because all that they got was projections from everybody else. All that they got was clothes from everybody else. They got dressed by everyone else. I think that's a really great metaphor for this. If you did not get healthy childhood development, you were just fucking projected onto, pressured, and dressed by everybody else, right? You might not really know who the fuck you are. And that's a fucking shit show. Because what does that mean for your relationships? You might not even know why you're in relationships. You might just be in relationships to avoid being alone, right? And I'm not here to shame anybody or to guilt anybody. No, 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 no. You are where you are, and that's fine. That's fine. You do you. Absolutely. I'm just so fascinated by this because, I mean, full honesty, like, I've feared being alone, being single. I have, right? Taking time to yourself is one of the most beautiful things that you can do for yourself. Actually sitting in silence and letting your sense of self form and become, and just like meeting yourself, like, oh hey, what's up? I've been avoiding you for a very long time. Let's talk, let's have a conversation. What are you about? What do you like? What do you who are you? You know, that whole dynamic, it's fucking wonderful. And imagine, I will actually end off with this. Imagine the contrast between that, you being gentle with yourself, looking into yourself. Oh, hey, what's up? And maybe the fucked up childhood that you got. I'm not talking about myself, I'm just talking about the general form, right? Imagine you being gentle with yourself and learning about yourself, self care, loving yourself, right? And that contrasting with a fucked up childhood, right? Imagine that, right? Like actually like sitting with yourself and being like, oh wow, people were very hard on us. Or just, people were very hard on me. I don't want to continue that. I want to end that pattern. I want to close that loop from childhood. Let's move forward in a healthy direction. Let's actually introspect and look into ourselves and break a generational pattern of avoidance, right? That's very powerful. I might make a part two to this. I'm not sure yet, but yeah.